Hello and welcome to episode 19 of That 60s Recording Podcast, the podcast that has conversations inspired by the golden era of recording. So this episode will be going out on the 5th of January, that's what the date will be today, or it was the 5th of January when this episode went out if you're listening to it afterwards, which means you'll have had your Christmas. And I hope that you have all had a fantastic Christmas and New Year, and it's brought a little bit of joy into what has otherwise been kind of an antisocial year, really, in a physical sense at least. And I hope you all got some nice Christmas presents, because after all, that's what Christmas is about, isn't it? I'm only joking, of course it's not. It's about... The best present I got was a griddle pan. And I think that means that I'm getting old if I get bought griddle pans. I mean, I asked for it. Does that definitely means that I'm getting old if I'm getting bought griddle pans that I asked for? Anyway, we're going to move on. Okay, so the episode today is part 2 of my conversation with recording engineer and console designer Malcolm Toft. And in this episode, we talk a little bit more about the sort of gear side of things and the console design and how we got into all of that kind of stuff. Another really, really interesting conversation, and I will see you on the other side. Here we go. Enjoy Malcolm Toft, part 2. You were obviously hugely responsible for the A-range console at Trident. So how did it come about that...
Yeah, well, that was another interesting story, because I became studio manager after about 3 years. And they were always very appreciative of the role that I'd taken at Trident, you know, and as the management, Barry and Norman, you know, it's like, let's look after Malcolm kind of thing. They were all very good like that. And we weren't happy with the consoles. That we had 2 Sound Techniques consoles, and we in particular weren't happy with the second one. When we went from 8-track to 16-track, we got a new 16-track console from Sound Techniques. The old 8-track went into a mixing room that we set up on the next floor. And we just weren't happy with the 16-track one. It was poorly put together. And so the reason for that was Sound Techniques had taken on a big contract with CTS Studios to supply a lot of consoles, and I think their eye was off the ball. So we weren't particularly happy with it. We wanted to go to 24-track, and our control room was quite small, very small in fact. We only had a space of 5 feet to get the console in. It was up on a riser.
Okay.
And we always had a remote pack base, so we didn't have a lot of space. And we wanted to go 24-track. So, crikey, you've got 24 monitors, you've got all this stuff. How are we going to get it in? So I was tasked with looking at consoles, other console alternatives. And at that time, there was Neve, a company called Helios, a company called Kodak, and that was pretty well it, really, in the UK. We ruled out the Helios because it was a wraparound type console, which wouldn't fit for us. The Kodak wasn't really for us. There were, again, things on it that it was a little bit overcomplicated. And the seminal moment was, and I can remember it to this day, Barry and I went up to Cambridge to meet with all the people at Neve. Now, we were a very prestigious studio by this time, you know, and Neve wanted to sell a console to us. So they wined us and they dined us, and we ended up in this big boardroom. Rupert wasn't there, but there was a lady called Betty Harmer-Smith who was in charge of all their engineering side. And we sat down at this big table and started to discuss our needs for this console. And we said, well, you know, we want 24-track monitoring, we want this and we want that. And they couldn't provide 24-track monitoring, they only had 16-track. And they couldn't, and it was like, oh, can we modify this module to do it? Can we modify the 1073 to do it? Da, 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 da. And what struck me at that meeting was about 6 or 7 people, salespeople, electronics people, engineering people. There was no one there who'd actually been a recording engineer. There was no one saying to us, oh, but if you route that through this thing or use that direct output or da-da-da, there was nobody saying that. It was all about, can we modify this? Can we make this to do that? And we were driving back, and I can remember this to this day, driving back, Barry and I in the car, and we were quite quiet because in a way, Neve was our last hope. And I said to Barry, I don't think we're going to, you know, I can't see Neve being able to do what we want. Because we wanted EQ on the monitor section as well. Because Roy Thomas Baker had said that when we get tapes in from America, they're on the NAB characteristic, and our tapes are CCIR, so that when they're played back without realigning the whole tape machine, there's a difference between the bass and the treble. You have to equalise them to make them sound good. Yeah. So he wanted EQ on treble and bass so that they could just, without having to change all the tape recording, just simulate what it would sound like. Good idea. But nobody could put EQ on the monitors. Didn't put EQ on the monitors. That was anathema. Crikey, didn't do that. Monitor section was flat. So this is again where Neve had problems with it. So we're driving back, and we both said, "We're not going to get what we want from Neve, are we?" And I said, "No." He said, "What? I don't know what we can do." But I've been playing around. I've been building my own mixer for a while because I'd always thought my career path would be to own my own studio. Mm-hmm. And the best way to do that, build my own console, because we couldn't afford to go out and buy one. So I thought, I'd always been interested in tinkering. I've been building, a console at home for years and messing about. And we had at Trident Studios a very good maintenance guy called Barry Porter, who used to, do all our maintenance and servicing. We always had a maintenance engineer on tap at Trident Studios. So if there was any fault, he came down from the top floor and would fix it. Mm-hmm. And in my off times, I would sit with Barry and say, "Look, I'm trying to build this." And Barry was very knowledgeable electronics-wise, and he helped me with some of the circuitry. And I was, building his console at home. So we're driving home, and Barry said, "Well, what are we going to do?" And I, 26 years of age or whatever I was at that time, I said, in one of these foolish moments, "I think we could build our own console." And he said, "Really?" I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "There's Barry, he's a very good electronics guy, and I've been talking to him and whatever. I think we could build our own console." So they said, "Well, because it's you, we'll have a listen to it." So we went out and had a luncheon or whatever, and I said to Barry and Norman, I said, "Look, I think we've got enough technical knowledge and certainly enough system knowledge. I'll do all the systems and everything else, design all the feature set and take care of all of that and the general building of it. And Barry can do the electronics. I think we can do it." So they took, again, a real chance, and they said, "Okay, we'll give you and Barry a year to build this console, and we'll relieve Barry as much as we can of his duties. We'll give you a room on the top floor. You two go away and design this console." So we spoke to the engineers about the facilities that they want. I did, panel layouts and and I did all the circuit layout, the taping of the. And we got a friend of Barry, Sheffield, his flatmate actually, Willie, to do all the mechanical design. So that's how we built first Trident A-Range, and it was ever only built as a one-off for the studio. But as we were building it, clients heard that we were building building this console, and stop by and say, "Oh, how's it going?" And I'd show them drawings and everything else. And before we knew it, there was Chipping Norton Studios that were opening up, who were friends of Roy Thomas Baker. And a client of mine, John Congus, who wrote He's Gonna Step on You, the Happy Mondays song.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, well, I recorded John Congus. And he was setting up a studio and he said, "Could you build a console for me?" So I used the designs that I would use for my own console at home, the one that I was going to build. We called that the Trident B range.
Wow.
So I to management, I said, "Look, I've got a couple of orders come through if we want them, How about setting up a company to make mixers?" And that's what they did. They said, "Okay, we'll set up a mixer company and you'll be managing director of it and oversee it all. And Barry can have shares as well." So they gave us a shareholding in the company and set me up as managing director to oversee it all. That's how we started Trident. And unfortunately, Barry left after a couple of years because he just couldn't take the sort of responsibility, if you like. He just wanted to be a designer and whatever. And so, but yeah, that's how we started Trident. And I look back on it, and it's crazy because the first session we ever did on the A-Range was Elton John.
Wow.
Right, to finish this console all night. And it wasn't half working. And the first bloody session we did was Elton John. You couldn't make it up, could you?
Unbelievable.
Unfortunately, abandoned the session. We got the console working a few days after that, but you couldn't make this stuff up. You really couldn't.
Amazing.
On the road to making.
To have the foresight, not only to have the foresight to sort of envisage putting something together like that, and also be in the right place to have somebody who's willing to take the chance on you is
I know.
unbelievable.
When I look back, I mean, this wasn't just a small console. This was a groundbreaking console. It was within the space of 5 feet. It had 4-band EQ on every channel. It had EQ on the monitor section. It had, 6. I mean, it was a huge console of that day. There was nothing like it on the market at all that even came close to it. And when I look back on what we achieved in just over a year, it was pretty incredible, really. Pretty incredible. I still don't know. And to have that bravado at that age, to say, yeah, we'll do this. Because it could have fallen so flat. It really could. It could have so easily missed.
But as the same with joining Trident and all that stuff, you took a risk and it's paid off.
It paid off. Yeah. It's about, I think, again, another thing I talked about, having a bit of self-belief. I think you have to believe in yourself. And at that time, I did believe. I believed. I never doubted for a second that we couldn't do this stuff. I never doubted for a second that I couldn't be up to the job at Trident. I didn't have the experience, but I knew I could learn. I knew I was a good learner, and I knew that I could do it. And it was the same with building the console. I didn't have the experience, but I had belief, self-belief. And if you haven't got self-belief, you will fail. If you've got self-belief, no matter what the odds are, you will somehow succeed.
That's a hugely important lesson. It's hugely important.
But you're surprised how many people, we ought to have a certain amount of self-doubt, but if your self-belief overrides that, you have to have a healthy amount of self-doubt. You can't be so arrogant. It doesn't matter what happens, I will succeed. You've got to have that questioning. But if overriding, you fall on the side, 70, 80%, yes, I do believe this is going to work. I believe that, I'm going to make this happen,
Yeah.
Then you've got a good chance of it happening. If you ain't 50-50, well, I'll give it a good shot. And if it comes off, it comes off. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You will not succeed.
There's absolute gold dust. And, of course, you've kept up with... your name and Trident has become synonymous with sort of extremely high quality equipment now, and you've kept up with the times, if you like. There's a lot of you continued building consoles, and you've made 500 series equipment. What's your take on 500 series?
I think it's a good format. I think depends what you're trying to do. If you just want a simple system, then it gives you the flexibility of having different modules and different things that you can plug into. It's good for that. It's like analog plugins, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
If you just want to have flavors that you can plug into, then I think it's a good idea. I think trouble is that the world and his wife are now making modules for 500 series. There's so much choice out there, and that becomes really, really difficult. What I think is that, genuine recording, you have to have front end. I think you've got to have analog front end. I know it sounds old school and everything else, but you've still got to get it into the box, whatever you do. And the more you can do before you get it into the box, the better. It's as simple as that. Do not rely on getting everything into a door and then fixing it all in the door. As I've said before, I mix as I go. To me, you have to have front end, whether that's a console, whether that's some modules, whatever it might be. You need to process the sound on the way in and get the sounds pretty well right. Do not think, the bass sound isn't quite right, but I'll fix it in the door. You can't leave that to chance. I never like to leave something to chance.
I think we're seeing currently with music, there's a big... I would say it's an interesting time for both of those takes on it. And, I read an interview that you did with Sound on Sound back in 94. So that's what, 16... Wow. It's more than 16, 26 years ago.
6 years ago, yeah.
Wow. And, they were questioning... One of the questions they asked you then was about the relevance of a recording console. And here you are almost 30 years later...
Well...
but they're still clearly important because we're still talking about them.
The great thing, actually, we've gone through this evolution. There was a time back in the early 90s I couldn't set an analog console to save my life because oh, unless it's digital, we don't want to know. There is a very nice cohabitation now between analog and digital. People don't found on analog consoles now and go, oh, that's old school, we want digital. People realise that there is a benefit. There's that touch and feel of an analog console. There's that thing of sitting behind the console and moving the faders and just that tactile feel that you cannot replace by being inside the box. You just don't get that tactile feel. So it depends what you want. If you're working at home, you're on your own, etc., then fine, you can work in the box and whatever. But if you're working with other people and you want that tactile feel and that you're mixing, there's nothing better really than to push faders up and down.
So if we almost swing back round to where we started, the course that you've put together, I've made some notes on a couple of the things that you touch on the course that I think are really important and almost move on from where we've just what we've just been speaking about. That when I started recording with a digital preamps, and it's the only control you have is to set a level, and that's kind of it. And then there's all these words and phrases that get bandied about, like gain structure and dynamic range and headroom, that as a young producer or a recording engineer, if you like, there's no way of understanding them with that equipment.
Absolutely not. I have this big thing about digital recording, about DBFS, because it's such a movable feat. DBFS is a term that's used by the manufacturers of digital recording to set their own levels. In the analog world, there are set levels. There's 0 dBm, which is 0.775 volt, and +4, which is 0 VU, which is 1.225 volt. You know where you are with analog. You know where you are that, when your meters read 0, you're reading +4 dBm, and you know what that level is, okay? The moment you go into a converter, you don't know where you are, because that 0 dBFS can be whatever the manufacturer of the converter box wants it to be. And I found this out. I ran my own studio down in Devon some years ago. I went back to recording in the early 20s. I moved down to Devon, had a big basement. I thought, I'm going to turn this into a studio. So I did this. I put one of my consoles in there. And the first thing I bought back in the early 20s was a Mackie. What's it called? It was a 24-track tape recorder in a box, basically. Mm-hmm. Great. It was a computer in a box, and it was a tape machine in a box. And it was a 24-track recorder in a 3U box, had converters on it. So you went in analog, and it was really, really good, because for the first time I actually heard it played back exactly what I was recording. Didn't have any of the anomalies of tape, you could hear it back. And it was fantastic. But my desk, driving it, I had bar graphs on it that only went up to about +10 or +12. The Mackie needed a hell of a lot of level to go into it to get it into the sweet spot of the recorders. So I was having to pump about +15 to get this Mackie to really sort of get a good signal-noise ratio. Then on the output of the desk, I was using a computer as my stereo recorder. I had a dedicated computer. I said, right, that's my 2-track. Had a little converter board, 2-track converter board. That converter, I had to attenuate because the desk was giving it too much level. So on the 24-track side, I wasn't sending, I was having to really pump levels. Going out of the desk, I was having problems distorting the converter because I was sending too much level. And I thought, hang on, these are both supposed to be working at 0 dBFS. And that's when I realised the problem is that converters only run on 5 volts. So you have to attenuate the signal to get any kind of analog into it. And then you've got to pump it up at the output. So to keep their specifications good, you say, oh, we've got 120 dB dynamic range. They have to fudge the figures a bit. So you get this anomaly that when you're going into some converters. Now, my question on all of this is, if you're analog going into a converter and then you're analog coming back, why are the meters in digital? Why don't they show the analog signal? Then you know exactly where you were. So if you had a converter that when you send 0 from your desk also read 0, so it knew where you were, wouldn't that be much better instead of this weird DBFS? Because I put 0 into a converter and the meter on the converter is way down low because it needs more level. So I'm going to be producing converters probably next year which actually work in the analog.
Ah, fantastic.
So that when you put 0 in, the meters will read 0 dB and the converter will do the rest for you. So you can use it just like it was an analog bit of gear, but it's doing your conversion. And on the way back, it will come back the same. So know exactly where you are.
It almost needs a bit of standardization between, between companies.
Well, nobody is, because the problem with the digital guys is they don't understand analog and they don't really understand audio. These are digital guys. They live in their digital bubble, and they don't really, really understand what the user wants. And they, they are told, well, you just make it the best that you can, and we have to fudge the figures to make our product look good. Because the irony of it is, again, in my studio, the only equipment that was noisy was the digital gear. When I use a digital effect like a Lexicon or whatever it might be, or an Alesis, whenever I used a digital reverb and brought it back through the console, the noise through that is far greater than anything the console was producing.
Wow, interesting.
It's 120 dB dynamic range, it's this and it's that, So this is one of the problems you have cohabiting with digital, So it's one of the things that I want to address in the future, We do a moving fader system for consoles as well, FaderMate, which acts as a door controller. Turns your analog console into a door controller, and it's got moving motorized faders on it. So there's lots of things that I'm into at the moment. Yeah.
I'm pleased that you've touched on them, because it was something that I was going to ask you, because you seem really well placed in terms of your experience and your understanding of the technical side of it and how music operates currently. You're almost perfectly placed to address some of these problems that you're bringing up.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I'm in a good place. I also do some bass guitar equipment as well, product called Basics.
I've seen that, yes.
Bass preamp system, which my dear friend Tony Visconti is using. Got Neil Murray from Whitesnake. Even got Pino Palladino using it.
Oh wow! I mean, he's the cream of the crop, isn't he?
Preamp system for bass players. It basically takes the controls that are on your amp and puts them at your feet. So, and all the controls light up. So when you're on a stage, in a dark stage, you can actually see what's on there, and all the EQ's been designed specifically for bass players. So yeah, that's called Basics. So yeah, I'm into a lot of things.
Something I just want to finish up on a last couple of things. That thing we touched on this on the phone, and it's something that I've had requested of me via email, is that I ask people. And obviously will be information in your course that will touch on this too. But what would you say is the single most important thing for, say, a bedroom recordist to do that will take their recordings to the next level?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you read my recordings, I may just joke to you on the phone, do they? What people don't realise at home is that, again, you go into a recording studio, they've spent tens of thousands of pounds on acoustics. There's a reason for that. And the reason for that, they don't do it for the good of their health. They do it because they need to do it. That's the basic difference between a recording space and a home space or home environment. You can do a tremendous amount of either damage or good to your sound according to how you treat the environment that you're in. And if you're working, I'm looking behind you now, you've got a normal room, they've got quite, reflective surfaces. If you put a microphone into that room now and try to record, even close up to the mic, you'd hear the room. It'd be bouncing off the walls. So the first thing that people recording at home need to do, and this is what I say in my course, is you need to treat the room. And I found a lot about this years ago with a company that I was working with, sold microphones. And we would go to trade shows and have all our microphones on display, and people could actually listen to the microphones. And they would come up and they'd say, I'd like to try a microphone out. Fine, yeah. I've got a Rode NT1. I just can't get a good vocal sound, And I said, well, actually, a Rode NT1's a good microphone. Yeah, but I'm thinking about changing it. Why? Just can't get a good sound. Okay, where are you recording? I'm at home. I've got home studio. Okay, where's the studio? It's my bedroom, or it's an attic room. It's this. Yeah, okay. And what does it consist of? Well, it's a room, you know. Yeah, but, I've got some meg boxes up on the wall. I've got this and that. But that doesn't do it. That doesn't do it, you know. I say to them, look, you need to have some acoustic treatment, some relatively good acoustic treatment, stop reflections from the room. Because there's nothing wrong with your microphone. An NT1 is a good microphone. And they go, oh, well, so you don't want to sell me a microphone? I said, well, to be honest with you, if I sold you a microphone, you'd be no happier than with what you've got, because what you've got is a decent microphone. You've got to look at where you're recording. So what I say to people, the best thing to do to make your, you know, to get better recordings is to improve the space in which you are recording.
So when you say good acoustic treatment, you don't necessarily mean expensive acoustic treatment. You know, you're talking about duvet covers. Actual duvets.
They're the best thing in the world, because if you look at duvets, they're flexible, they're thick, and they're absorbent. So, and they also, you can put them up in a room, hold them up with gaffer tape, whatever you want to do, and you can take them down. But if you put a few duvets up in your room, you'll be amazed at how much you will be able to control the sound and deaden. And if you put them on opposing walls, so that the sound reflections aren't able to, bounce backwards and forwards, they will get absorbed by the duvet, and you will make an enormous amount of difference to the way that you record. That's the first thing that you need to do. Because when I record a vocal, I very rarely put any top sort of EQ on. I don't. I record vocals flat, because that's what the microphone does. Most condenser microphones, halfway decent ones costing anything from, say, 80 quid upwards, going to give you a good vocal sound. That's what they're good at. You know, it's what the diaphragms are for. They're renowned for being good for vocals. So if you've got a good microphone, set usually to, obviously a cardioid position, and you're reasonably close to the mic with a pop shield, good idea, and you've got a good acoustic space, the rest of it pretty well takes care of itself. Now, I do also usually record, again, I do say so, I think, in my tutorials, bit of compression doesn't do any harm when you're recording a vocal. The reason is that the human voice is probably one of the widest dynamic ranges of any instrument. You know, you think of us now, we're talking at an ambient level, we're probably talking 50, 60 dB ambient level. If I shout, I go up to about 90 dB. That's a 30 dB change in level. What instruments do you know that can do that, can change so dramatically? So we sing a verse, and we're singing normally, and then we shout when we come to the chorus, because we're putting a lot into it, and you get this not only difference in volume, but difference in dynamic range, and we can cause distortion. So I always use a compressor, and I use it on the way in, because you can't compress afterwards, because it's too late. You want to stop that as you go, and you want to make sure that, again, it fits in with the backing, and you can't tell that if you do it afterwards, because it's too late. So I always, always, always have recorded with a little bit of compression, just enough to keep, the vocal range within a decent dynamic range. So the two things that I would advocate to get good vocal recordings are acoustics, and also to use, if you know that you've got a strong voice and, good dynamic range, and most people have, use a bit of compression.
I think they're, I think they're really practical tips, and it's something that I've said it at the beginning again, that I love about these videos is it sort of demystifies all of that. There's so many compression techniques that are on YouTube that sort of, it's just you could get lost in a sea of that.
Compression is really simple. Compression is really simple, okay? If you're recording most instruments, you need a fast attack and a slow release. It's as simple as that. Fast attack, because you want it to catch the sound before it gets too loud. If you put a slow attack on it, the sound will go up and then come down, whereas you want it to be even, so you want a fast attack. You want a slow release, because if you had a fast release, the sound would suddenly come up before you hit the next word, so you get this pumping effect, what they call pumping. Mm-hmm. Very simple. Fast attack, slow release. The ratio that you use Just depends on how much you want to control it. It's that bloody simple.
I,
You know,
I mean, it's the theme that runs through.
All this, oh, well, a 2.21 compression ratio and da-da-da-da-da, it's really quite simple. Set the maximum amount of level that you want, okay? So that's my ceiling. I don't want it to say go over that sort of signal. And then just set your compression ratio so that it gives you that amount, won't let it go past. What a compression ratio means is that for every 2 dB in, you only get 1 dB out. For every 3 dB in, you only get 1 dB out. For every 4 dB over that, you only get 1 dB out. So you go, okay, well, yeah, my peaks are 6 dB over where I want them to be. Right, I'll put a 6-to-1 compression ratio on it. It really is simple. All of this stuff is simple, but people make it complicated.
And absolutely, and you can see why upcoming recordists are looking at YouTube and getting confused.
They do, And of course, the problem with doors and plugins is what you've got to remember about a door and what you've got to remember about a plugin, they try to be all things to all men. They don't know that you're just trying to record a vocal. They think you might be recording a bassoon, or you might be recording a trombone, or you might be recording the piano. So they make their programs, their algorithms, whatever they are, to do absolutely everything. And that's the problem with a door. They design doors to be for gaming. They design it for being film post-production. They design it for being jingle production. They design it for being musicians recording at home. So it's trying to be all things to all men. So there's all these feature sets in there that are confusing, that you go, oh, do I need this for that? No, you only need that for gaming, but it doesn't tell you that. So you've got to kind of disseminate all of this information and just get it down to the basics. And that's, again, what I try to do in these tutorials. And you've got to remember that about a lot of these plugins, a lot of this gear. It's trying to do everything so that you'll go, oh, I only need this one product. But in doing so, it misses the point of maybe the simple thing that you actually want to do. Stops it being really simple. The compressors, the LA2As that we had at Trident Studio were 2 knobs. One was compression and one was makeup gain.
Amazing.
Hey Jude, that heavily compressed piano on Hey Jude is an LA2A turned up. That's it. 2 knobs.
I mean, yeah, it's a world apart from. I mean, I'm thinking of some of the plug-in compressors I've seen tutorials on that have got, they've got 15, 16, 20 knobs.
Feed forward, feedback, side chain, da-da-da, all this stuff. I mean, for God's sake, just forget it. You can trigger stuff, but for the vast majority of people, you don't need this stuff. This is really getting into the realms of, super fine points. But to be honest with you, you don't need all this, whether it's feed forward or feedback, whether it's there are different types of compressors. There's VCA and there's photo-optical, and there's different types of compressors. Yes, I agree with that, and that's again in my tutorials. I explain the differences between them. But by and large, they will all do the same thing. Generally speaking, they will do the same thing. You just have to decide which one is best for your particular job.
I mean, this is it, and this is why I mean, from a sort of consumer point of view, I thank you for putting something like this together, because I think it's so important for us, as a relatively young person in this industry. I want to hear from people like yourself, and I want to learn. And like we said right back at the beginning, I want to go back and know how it was done at the beginning, because that's a sound that we still crave, and there's good reason why we crave that sound. And it's so important that there is a record of the way of you communicating your thoughts on this. So yeah, I really appreciate you putting that course together, and I think it's I just think it's brilliant, and I'm gonna wax on lyrically about all of this in the intro and outro. But yeah,
very, very kind of you. But yeah, I mean, it is music. We have to remember is a creative thing. It's a spontaneous thing, and we have to try and capture that in our recordings. And all the good recordings that you listen to the Stones. I mean, that's just total spontaneity. That's not about recording techniques. That's not about fantastic production. And, I always say that if you've got the right, you've got a good song, you can record it on a cassette deck, or you can record it on, the best equipment in the world. If it's not a good song, it ain't going to make it. Production and recording techniques do a certain amount to make a good record, but they are not the be-all and end-all. You have to start with good product to start with. You have to have a good song, good product. You can't polish the proverbial, it's as simple as that. But if you do start with good material, then you can build on that, and, you can certainly do a lot. But you can over-egg the pudding so much. You can really over-egg it if you're not careful.
I think that's very easy to do. I know from people I work with that there's too many options, and there's too much that you can hold on to. Takes that you can keep and look back on, and
right.
And it's very easy to over-egg the pudding.
Oh yeah.
I think there has been such a huge amount for people to take away, and for me to take away from this conversation. I just want to say thank you again for coming on to speak to me.
My pleasure.
It's been absolutely lovely. Thank you.
Right, take care. Speak to you soon.
All right, so I'll stop the recording, but it's I do genuinely really appreciate it, Malcolm. Like I really
enjoyed it.
I wouldn't have
talking about this stuff, especially the guys like you, because you are the new generation and you're so keen and enthusiastic. This is what I love, it really is. And I want to pass this stuff on to you guys because it is important, because it gets lost, and as I said to you before, somebody, when I was down in Devon 4 or 5 years ago, people said, oh, you should do some videos because all the stuff that you've learned, There's another guy down there, Richard Bigby Smith. He'd done all the Bob Marley and the Wailers. He'd done a lot of Led Zeppelin stuff and all this what's the studio? I can't think of the studio. Anyway, he was an engineer, same sort of age as me. And we come from similar, and we both said, we used to put all this stuff down, we'd sort of shoot the breeze, and people would come in saying, hey, you guys, listening to you guys talking about, when you do things and everything else. And, it would be great to put all this stuff down. And I thought, we really need to, before we get too old or something happens, to just pass this stuff on. And that's what spurred me on to doing the tutorial.
Yeah, I just think they are such a good record, and I keep saying it. I love how simple everything is. That's something that seems to be missing from a lot of courses and things that are coming out now. It's just simple, and you explain it in such a simple way, and it's so. Obviously, there's technical details as well, which are important to understand, but it explodes that myth that I said before. It just makes everything like, well, it's just this.
Yeah, I know. That I got so frustrated looking at YouTube before I thought, right, let's have a look at some of these tutorials. And there's these young, keen, enthusiastic guys, and they're going, yeah, well, you use this plug-in, and then you do this, and you do that, and then you tweak this, and then you change that to a sharp curve. And, I just thought, my God, you're just overcomplicating everything, and you're missing out the fundamentals. You're missing out the basic parts of it, because they just don't get it, because they haven't grown up in this studio environment, and that's why I'm just generally trying to cut through this morass of stuff. Because you look at the forums, if you ever go on Gear Sluts and things like that, these guys are so into the equipment and the gear and everything else, and it's unbelievable, the minutiae that they talk about.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, I agree. I drop in occasionally, and I try to take everything with a pinch of salt. I've got my attitude towards sort of drum kits and drum miking and things like that is very, it's cut from the same cloth of what you're talking about. And I've tried to, as I've learned more about music production and engineering, I've tried to approach it with the same attitude. I'm not into bells and whistles. I'm into what I know sounds good and that that kind of thing.
If you can't get a good drum sound with a maximum of 6 mics, which is only when you're close miking the racks, you've got one on the floor tom, one on each of the rack toms, say that's 3 mics, one on the snare, a couple of overheads and a bass drum mic. If you can't get a good drum sound We used 3 mics. I mean, it's just a quick story. I'll tell you that. Again, I was recording with Tony. Sorry if I'm keeping your time up.
No, you're fine. I'm more concerned about keeping your time. I love this.
We did, in the morning, I did a big session, again, with Clem Catini playing drums. And it was, a huge session. And Clem was late. And he turned up and he said, I had trouble parking. He said, I think you've got a house kit. Norman was the drummer, Norman Sheffield. He had a Ludwig kit. I said, yeah, there's the house Ludwig kit. So would you mind if I use that? I said, no, that's fine. So he scuffled in, And so he was late, and I'd used most of the microphones up. So I had 3 mics left for drums, which was a snare drum mic, bass drum mic, and 1 overhead, So we set up the session, and I pulled up the drum mics, brilliant drum sound, absolutely great. Did the session, everybody went home. Tony came in the afternoon, and he saw the mic set up on the drum kit. He said, oh, you've got mic set up on the drum kit, and, might as well use that, it's fine. Took 5 hours trying to get a drum sound.
Whoa.
And the difference was the player.
Yeah.
Because the difference between people like Clem and all the session musicians, and why us engineers would say, I'll get Ronnie Verrill or Alan White, whoever it might be, Charlie Morgan, would be because, and it was like Herbie Flowers again. Herbie would come in, you'd give him any amp, any bass, and it would sound fantastic.
Yeah.
And the difference between Clem was that he knew what sound he needed to make from that drum for you to get the right sound up there. So he would lay the stick on the drum according to how the drum would sound to make sure I got the right sound. And he was never, every drum beat sounded the same volume. There was never one beat that wasn't quite the same volume. So he made the kit sound like it, should do for me. And yet, when you get a player from a band who's not used to playing in the studio, couldn't make that drum kit sound the same way. And that was just a classic instance, made me realise just how good these session players are. And it isn't all about their musical ability. It's about the fact, as I say, you could say to Herbie, I want a clicky type bass. And he'd immediately listen to the track, he'd know what you meant, and he'd come up with exactly the right sound.
I had this. I had the same conversation with an artist that I'm working with at the moment, and he'd employed a friend of his who's I'm assuming is more of a band drummer to do some drums for him, and it just wasn't working right, and that's why he came to me to do it. And I'm obviously not. This isn't in any way about how good I am at it, but we were talking about how, I've done a lot of this stuff, and you begin to realise that playing live and playing in the studio are completely different beasts.
Totally different things. Absolutely they are. Because when you're live, you want your bass drum as flappy as possible and to really just get out there.
Yeah.
Whereas the studio, it's got to be tight and controlled. That's the last thing you want, And a lot of drummers aren't happy playing like that, And again, they hit the bass drum way too hard for the studio. So it's a completely different thing to playing in the studio than it is. And a lot of musicians indeed don't like, a lot of musicians have said, I hate doing studio work, I much prefer to play live because everything's under the microscope.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah.
Every little fault you make, it really shows up the good players from the bad players, whereas you get away with it on stage, and then you get to, a guitarist, you get to the studio and you say, you've been playing that, E flat, you should have been playing an E major. You've been playing it all. I never realised until I heard the playback.
Yeah.
You can with it on stage.
That's it. You can gloss over those mistakes live. They're sort of part of the atmosphere. Whereas, it's quite a journey to becoming a good recording player. It's
it is. And it's not a thing that everybody likes. Because of the sterility of it, if you like, and the fact that you're under a microscope. And there's a lot of musicians who are intimidated. And that's again why, as an engineer, your job is to make the studio as homely a place as possible, to make you feel comfortable. And one thing I say again in my tutorials, if you listen to the one about actually being a recording engineer, I say the most important thing is a good headphone mix. Because if the musicians come into the studio and they've got a good headphone mix, they're immediately put at ease. Whereas if they're struggling, I just can't hear the bass, I can't hear the bass man, and the engineer's not listening and he's doing something else, he's getting the sound on the guitar and he's not listening, then, you know, the drummer or the bass player is not having it. It feels very ill at ease. Doesn't feel right. And so when they go to record, and it's not being addressed, they're just unhappy. And then they'll start to criticise the engineer or criticise the song, or it just makes you unhappy. Whereas if you say, oh, God, that sounds amazing. Yeah, I can play to this. What a difference that makes.
Yeah.
So to me, headphone mix is the most important thing you do. A lot of engineers don't get that. They're more in their own little world of, oh, I've got to get, what about my headphones? Don't worry about that. I'm just getting the drum sound. Don't worry about that. Well, you're getting the drum sound, but the drummer's not giving you the best because his headphones aren't right. It's common sense, isn't it, Joe?
It really is. It really is. I have honestly, I've learned so much speaking to you over this conversation and the conversation we had the other day. It's been, I'm just really grateful for you giving me your time, and you know, I love it, absolutely love it.
My pleasure, my pleasure. And you know, I know it's going to someone who's going to appreciate it, which really pleases me as well. You know, yeah, I'm more than happy.
Fantastic. So there we have it, Malcolm Toft. As usual, I hope that you enjoyed listening to that conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. I'm going to say it once again, Malcolm is such a lovely guy and is so keen to impart his knowledge that he's amassed over his years to the sort of audio world. So do go and check out his website, allaboutrecording.com, and buy that course for £15. That is correct, £15, 15. I've spent 10 times that on internet courses. That is just an absolute bargain, and for what you get, it's unbelievable. So don't even hesitate. If you get one piece of information from that course for £15, that is an absolute bargain. It costs more for an hour-long private lesson with somebody. That's insane. I can't tell you how cheap that is. I bought it. I bought it before I'd even recorded this podcast, and it's fantastic. Just go and buy it. Okay, so I'm very excited about this year. I've got a huge amount of exciting guests lined up for you. Next episode will hopefully be with Shel Talmy, who is a legendary 1960s producer, produced The Kinks and The Who, and cult band The Creation. I'm saying hopefully because I'm recording this before I've actually spoken to Shel. I'm actually due to speak to him tonight. But I hope that it obviously all goes swimmingly, so I'm assuming that it's going to be Shel. And I have a lot of other amazing guests lined up for this year. I'm hopefully going to do a series on 60s recording studios with a sort of music journalist who is an expert on this subject. I've got some more producers lined up and a couple of mastering engineers, all sorts of stuff. I don't want to give away the game too much, but I'm very excited about where this year is going to go. Please do spread the word about the podcast to everybody and anybody if you're enjoying what you're hearing. And I implore you to take the time to put a little review up on Apple Podcasts if you can. You don't even have to write anything. Just click the stars button. Anything like that really helps sort of lift the awareness for this podcast. Also want to say that you can get in contact with me if you like. My email address is joe@allyouneedisdrums.com, or there's a contact form on my website, which is allyouneedisdrums.com. Also on Instagram @allyouneedisdrums. And I'm on Facebook too, but I don't know if anybody uses that as much these days for music. I tend to do all my posting on Instagram. Anyway, please do feel free to get in contact with me. I love hearing from you. I love guest suggestions. I love feedback. I just like hearing from the people that listen to this podcast, wherever you are in the world. So yes, please do not hesitate to get in contact with me. Apologise that my voice is a little bit hoarse on these intros and outros today because I've been on a Zoom meeting this morning, and I am one of those people who struggles to control the volume of his voice on Zoom. So I've managed to make my throat hoarse. Anyway, that just leaves me to say thank you to my good friend Joe Kane for supplying the intro and outro music for this podcast, and another good friend of mine, David Henshaw, for the beautiful artwork that he supplies for me every couple of weeks. And here's to a fantastic 2021. I will see you in a couple of weeks, hopefully with Shel Talmy. Goodbye!